Welcome to the Bothell City Council meeting of December 3rd, 2019. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All council members are here. Meeting agenda approval. Is there any changes to tonight's meeting agenda? Awesome. Public engagement opportunities. Thursday, December 5th, Bothell Historical Transportation Series, the future. Joint guest speaker, Aaron Leonhardt, for Public Works Director, at 7 p.m. at the library to learn about what the future holds for Bothell Transportation. The city is now accepting applications for positions on the boards and commissions. Deadline to apply is January 10th of next year. Visit our website for more information. Next on the agenda is a special presentation. We have a ceremonial swearing in of our new judge, Mara Rozzano. Is she here? There you are. You're hiding. All right. And then we have the Superior Court Judge, George F. Appel, to swear in. Welcome. Go ahead, go down to the podium there.
Pardon me while I get my robe on. I'm going to do this right. And good evening, everybody. Citizens of Bothell, members of the council, city manager, Mr. Mayor, Madam Clerk. I'm George Appel. I'm a Superior Court judge. And this evening, it's my pleasure and my honor to swear in Mara Rozzano, your next, and actually, I guess, present Bothell Municipal Court Judge. But before I do, if I may, just a few comments, just a few remarks that I prepared. Because, you see, I've known Mara for over 26 years. We actually were raised together as young lawyers in the Snohomish County Prosecutor's Office all those years ago. And in that time, I have learned a thing or two about her, and I would like to share those things with you now, if I may.
Can I pay you not to?
They're all good. They're all good.
Oh, okay.
We came into the profession, the legal profession, in 1992, and in 1993, which was a very bad year for finding a job, we were both hired on, quote, unquote, hired on, in the Snohomish County Prosecutor's Office as special deputies. Special meant unpaid. And we both started working within a week of one another. In May of 1993, we, being unpaid, we each lived with our parents. We shared a small office and a telephone. And we brought our sack lunches to work, and we ate them together because we couldn't afford to go out like the other deputies. But I will tell you that Mara was always full of enthusiasm. Nobody worked harder. She worked her caseload extraordinarily hard, late into the night frequently, but also nobody had a more positive attitude. I mean, it was actually it was fun sharing that little office all that time. And eventually we both made the cut and were hired on, and it was customary in those days when you were a young deputy prosecutor to be formed, so to speak, by the more experienced deputies, and they would teach these classes, and we were expected to attend and learn what we were expected to know and become the kind of lawyers that we needed to be. I remember clearly one such class in which a senior Snohomish County deputy prosecutor impressed on us the importance of our integrity and the need to be honest, utterly honest in every single thing that we did. And the man was as demanding as he was convincing that we act with the highest integrity at all times. And I know that Mara agreed with him because later she married him. And he's standing at the back of the council chamber ready to enrobe her. And I've always felt Ron Dersh and Mara Rozzano made an excellent team, but that really is another story. While our careers paralleled one another, I found a great deal to admire about Mara. She was affable, being as comfortable with opposing counsel as she was with her own colleagues. She could not be outworked, she could not be outsmarted, and yet she always kept an eye on what was fair. In all that time, and all the time I've known her, she never treated the practice of law as a game, but always approached it with the seriousness it deserved. I always thought she would make an outstanding judge, and she did. She served the people of Monroe with her characteristic integrity, work ethic, and fairness. And now the city of Bothell is fortunate to have her on the bench. And now, it is time that we did this.
You're making me blush.
Here, we can both look on.
I can't read it. I don't have my glasses.
Oh, all right. Please raise your right hand. Yes, you've got it. Good. Okay. And repeat after me. I, Mara J. Rozzano,
I, Mara J. Rozzano,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Washington,
and the Constitution of the State of Washington,
and that I will faithfully discharge
and that I will faithfully discharge
the duties of the office
of
Judge of the Municipal Court of Bothell
Judge of the Municipal Court of Bothell
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
Congratulations. Yeah, just give you a flat space there. Mine as well. And it is done.
All right. The ceremonial robing. Thank you. Please be seated. Thank you, Judge Apple. George, he always says such nice things about me, and I don't even have to pay him. It makes me blush because I remember, and I think that Judge Apple is extremely complimentary because, as I recall, he was there when I was leaving in the evening. So as far as nobody being able to outwork me, I think that he actually did. And definitely, as you see, he's a Superior Court judge. He's got the smarts too. So I want to I'm going to, so that you can all go home tonight, and there's some cake out in the lobby also, so I hope you partake of that. But I just want to reiterate my appreciation and my thanks to the City of Bothell for giving me the opportunity to come in and be your municipal court judge. I'm looking very much forward to it. I've already kind of dabbled and gotten my feet wet, and there's a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot of fun to be had doing it. I think that we're going to see some changes for a positive change, but not drastic, not, nothing. I'm not going to tear down any buildings or anything like that. I'm just going to see what I can do. I know that I was asked, and I'm just going to throw this in there, about the youth court. I've attended a couple of them. You have some amazing youth here in Bothell, extremely poised, competent. Judge Apple reminds me of our beginnings by talking about when we started back in '92, and I have to say that some of those young high school students are equally as good as I was in court, if not better. So you've got some tremendous talent, and looking forward to seeing where that goes from that. Other than that, I'm going to step down and just say thank you very much. I'm going to thank my husband for being here, even though he's obviously laid up a little bit, and for supporting me in my bid to come to Bothell. My friends who are here who are also in support. So thank you very much.
Judge, just be sure to get a building permit if you do tear any buildings down. So We were going to take a 10-minute recess so we can have cake and your family. So council will be back at 6:20. right, Bothell City Council is back from cake, and now we're into staff briefing, sustainable practices in park operations. We have Jesse Ott and Scott Purdy. Welcome.
Welcome. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Scott Purdy, and I'm the Parks Operations Manager for the City of Bothell. The City of Bothell's Parks and Recreation Department manages a wide variety of landscapes, from highly managed garden beds to naturally forested areas and everything in between. Using a sustainable approach, park staff are able to balance the need to keep these areas attractive and safe with the staff and resources we have available. The City of Bothell's Parks and Recreation Department does not use pesticides on city property, except when required by law to control noxious weeds and for public safety. Park staff have been working towards this goal over the last few years, and in 2019, all parks, trails, and municipal buildings are pesticide-free. The City of Bothell's Parks and Recreation Department is committed to the overall health and safety of our customers, pets, employees, and the environment. With that, our team has put together a short video that showcases our efforts and sets the stage for growing this program in the years to come. We're going to have a short video, so it's going to get dark in here for a little bit. If we could please get the lights.
Before the sun rises, Parks and Recreation is caring for Bothell's public lands. Consisting of nearly 400 acres, our parks come in all shapes and sizes, such as forests, trails, playgrounds, sports fields, and at times, free and open spaces. All of these parks are open to the public 365 days a year. Our parks enhance the quality of life and the well-being of our community by providing spaces for people to socialize, exercise, and relax. Bothell parks are a place where people can gather and recreate while feeling safe and welcome. These parks harbor a diversifying community and draw individuals from all walks of life. These people can range from someone taking an afternoon run, a bus of children on a field trip, or a group of friends gathering to celebrate. Stewardship of these community spaces require careful consideration and planning to protect them. We prepare not only for our current users, but for future generations as well. As part of our maintenance program, we have committed to using alternatives to pesticides and herbicides whenever possible. Recent studies show that pesticides and herbicides negatively impact the health of pets, people, and the environment. As awareness concerning these issues continues to grow, we in Parks and Recreation see the opportunity to significantly reduce and eliminate the use of these products. We see this as an achievable and sustainable goal for our city. Over the last couple of years, Bothell Parks and Recreation has intentionally reduced and/or eliminated the use of pesticides and herbicides throughout the entire parks system. Many of our parks have not been treated with either a pesticide or herbicide for over 2 years. While we haven't completely eliminated the use of chemicals due to the requirements concerning the removal of noxious weeds, we are now enacting best practices by utilizing licensed staff to target and significantly reduce our overall chemical footprint. At the end of the day, we want people to come out and enjoy the incredible recreational opportunities we have to offer. Whether that's kayaking down the Bothell Landing, exploring in the wooded arena, or arriving just on time to a soccer practice, we see the role that these spaces play within the lives of our community. We are here to support them by providing extraordinary service and preservation of our natural spaces. Healthy Bothell parks equal healthy people, and healthy people equal a sustainable and strong community for future generations to enjoy. This is the first step to a better tomorrow.
And before we get to any questions, I'd like to introduce Park Operation Leads Aaron Milner, Jesse Ott, and Park Maintenance Worker Aiden Emmons, who put the video together and have been instrumental in growing this program. Thank you.
Wow, video. That was awesome. All right, so who got the drone for Christmas? Is that you, Aiden? Yeah, that's what I thought. It's very well done. Thank you. Is there any questions from staff or, sorry, council? Deputy Mayor?
It was an awesome video. And I'm super, super excited about the pesticide herbicide-free policy. And I wondered, can you forward us the video and the presentation? Because I'd like to share that.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for all you do. It was really cool.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council? Oh, there we go. Councilmember Zorns?
Well, a couple of things. One, you guys are like one of my heroes. And I have an appreciation for you when I'm having to head off to work at dark 30 and I see one of your rigs out rolling. It's like, oh, I'm not the only one who has to get up early. So you strengthen us in more ways than you realize. Noxious weeds. I'm an avid gardener and have been in composting for over 30 years on, at our own home. And so I'm really conscious about a good ecosystem and healthy soil, and I love seeing what you're doing. But noxious weeds are my personal bane. So my curiosity is, what are I know in my neighborhood what noxious weeds I notice, but globally here in Bothell, what are our biggest noxious weeds that we're having to fight? And how are you fighting them?
Okay. Well, I would say, Japanese knotweed is definitely one of our biggest ones. It's very tough to control without herbicide. So that's one of the ones that we'll still use herbicide to control. So that's a big one. In the video, we saw some tansy ragwort. That one's also tough to control, but a lot of them we can control with manual controls by digging them up, planting other things, shading them out, but there's still a handful of them out there that are pretty tough to control without herbicide.
Well, knotweed is what, they're only good for honey. That's my personal opinion. And, I mean, I'm probably the crazy neighbor. I go out in the summer when it's hot and pour vinegar on where it's trying to come up the bank, and it just, kind of coughs and sputters. But, I wish there was a magic trick to making it go away. I was going to ask you about Himalayan blackberries and English ivy. Is that something that we pretty much have under control? We just keep chipping away at, and it just kind of behaves itself?
That's kind of one of those ones that, with enough just elbow grease, we can control. So, Himalayan blackberry can be intimidating, but it's actually one of the easier ones to get rid of. Once you get rid of that root ball, it's gone.
Right. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, I won't ask you what you use to make the knotweed go away, but it sounds like you have to play hardball in order to make it go away. So thank you.
Councilmember McAuliffe.
Thank you. And thank you for a great presentation. 400 acres. I want to know almost how many staff people we have to actually take care of 400 acres. You don't have to answer, but if you have it on your head, that would be great.
Yeah, we have 10 full-time employees and 5 seasonals.
That's amazing. And what I really want to ask you about is how we try and keep our river healthy, because what you're doing is making a difference for our river. And so could you just speak about that a little bit? Because we all care so much about, do we call it the river, the slough, whatever we want to call it, right?
Yeah, well, Jesse mentioned Japanese knotweed earlier, and that's actually, Japanese knotweed's one of the weeds that's on the state noxious weed list that affects our waterways as well. So we'll work on treating noxious weeds along our waterways. Going pesticide free, obviously a lot of these pesticides are mobile in the soils and they affect our waterways. Mm-hmm. And that having 400 acres in a city this size, I mean, that's a pretty substantial impact, just taking a stance going pesticides free alone.
Well, I want to tell you how impressed I am that with the number of employees that we actually have working on these parks of 400 acres, you do an outstanding job. So thank you.
Councilmember Olson.
Yeah, I just want to express my appreciation for the Parks Department. This has been one of our council goals for the couple years that I've been on council. So, we really appreciate that the Parks Department is putting the effort into, making this come to a reality. So just thank you. And it was a great video, and, it really hits home how much land there is, with some of those panoramic views and seeing it from the eagle eye perspective, and, just seeing this little cart driving through, and you're like, wow, takes a while to get through. So great work out there.
Councilmember McNeil.
Thank you. I just also wanted to echo appreciation, not only for the council, but for the community. As somebody who goes out and uses the playing fields with youth activity, sports teams, things like that, going into the parks, having open parks that are safe for our kids, for younger generations to go out and enjoy in perpetuity is fabulous. And we have a river that runs through our community, and taking stewardship of that river and making it a better place for the future generations. Hats off to the Parks Department for all the work that you guys do on all 400 acres plus. Thank you.
Let's see, everybody's got to say something now. Councilmember Agnew.
Okay. I just want to thank you guys a lot. I live across from Wayne's World, and I go there every day with the dogs, and they just love it. You keep that area up. I take the grandkids to Blythe Park or the Bothell Landing, and they love that. You guys do a fabulous job. I'm very appreciative.
All right, thanks, guys. I know this is totally something you love doing, and you signed up for this as maintenance technicians and leads, so thanks for coming to the council meeting. Appreciate it. I started off as a maintenance tech, just so you guys know, 20 years ago. Special place in my heart with you guys. Next is the city manager, council committee reports. City manager's good. Council committee reports. Wow, look at that. Moving right along. Visitor comment. I'll read my fun little thing I have to read. Each person addressing the council will give his or her name in an audible tone of voice for the record, and unless the council grants further time, shall limit the address to 3 minutes. No person other than the council and the person having the floor will be permitted to enter into any discussion either directly or through a member of the council without the permission of the mayor. And I have one sign-up sheet, which is Susan Gardner.
I'm Susan Gardner. See something, say something, but one might want to reconsider if one is in Bothell. On a summer Saturday, I witnessed a sewer overflow on SR 522. Public Works was closed, so I called the non-emergency number for the police department. On Monday, I could see that that issue was being addressed. See something, say something. During the Main Street construction, the supposedly environmentally friendly contractor had a personal pickup truck's engine running the entire 2+ hours we were meeting up with our weekly breakfast group at Steve's Cafe. I asked the city why. I'll assume it was to charge personal devices and for other non-work related purposes. See something, say something. After the Main Street construction, downtown merchants suggested at several meetings that the mid-block crosswalk needed to be more boldly delineated. Nothing happened. Drivers didn't, and still don't, perceive that as a crosswalk that merits caution. A downtown business person had a policy that her employees couldn't use that mid-block crosswalk to do company banking across the street. At weekly breakfasts at Steve's Cafe, 2 cars were typically parked in the crosswalk because the drivers didn't know that it was one, and it was vastly easier parking there than between the planters. See something, say something. No response. So I did something. As a volunteer during the December wine walk, I was able to slow traffic in the dark with my flashing necklace of lights. For the Chamber's June wine walk in broad daylight, I marked the crosswalk with chalk, drawing diagonal lines to mimic a crosswalk in the hopes that drivers would slow down. For this, the city manager, Jennifer Phillips, the city attorney, and you, the city council, charged me with a felony. I now have this life experience to add to my trove as I live life to the fullest. It is said that no good deed goes unpunished. You made that a reality for me. So here is the community engagement bit. I challenge you to read my statement to the police and then tell me that you did the right thing. I have been bullied into silence. See something, say something. Maybe not in Bothell.
That's the only sign-up sheet I have. Does anybody else want to provide public comment? Does staff want to respond to the last comment? We're good. Okay. Moving on to the consent agenda. Nothing's been pulled. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
There we go. Moved by Councilmember Agnew, seconded by Deputy Mayor. Any discussion on the motion? Go ahead and place your vote. Passes unanimously. We're on to public hearings, AB 19-207, 2019 Plan and Code Amendments regarding the capital facilities element and establishing minimum density and intensity within the within the Canyon Park and North Creek and Northeast 195th activity centers. I believe you wanted the floor, Director.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Members of the council, just to let you know, we did receive yesterday, per the deadline for SEPA appeals, we received an appeal from the Canyon Park Business Owners Association on the SEPA determination. The challenge is the adequacy of the environmental review that was done on these proposed amendments. For that reason, the council cannot take action until that issue is resolved. But we do recommend that you go forward with the public hearing this evening. Mr. Blackburn has a presentation prepared. I believe there are some folks here from Sound Transit, maybe some others that are also here to testify this evening on the public hearing. And then if you have questions of staff, and then we would ask that rather than action on the proposed amendments, that you simply continue the public hearing to your next, to the December 17th meeting, at which time we hope to have worked with the appellants and resolved the appeal issues. And if we're able to do that, then you could take action at that time. So that's our recommendation this evening. Rather than action, we would ask that you continue the public hearing.
I need to officially open the public hearing. Is it okay? That was prior to opening the public hearing. You okay?
Yep.
Okay. So the public hearing is officially open. Mr. Blackburn, welcome.
Good evening. Good evening, everybody. There are two parts to this plan and code amendment. First of all is a capital facilities element amendment, as well as the minimum density and intensity within activity centers plan and code amendment. Tonight, you're going to get a staff presentation. We'll take some public testimony, have an opportunity for council questions, and then, as Director Acotterman has identified, motion to continue the hearing to December the 17th. There's a couple of policy considerations for the council tonight. One is, of course, is to whether to amend the capital facilities element of the Imagine Bothell Comprehensive Plan to reflect voter-approved bonds to rebuild fire stations 42 and 45. This action certainly supports the council goal of public safety. The other action is whether to establish minimum residential densities and non-residential floor area ratios within the Canyon Park and North Creek Northeast 195th Street sub-area activity centers. And that action is supported by the council goals of economic development. The capital facilities element is very straightforward. This is basically to reflect the voter approval of bonds to rebuild the two fire stations, 42 and 45, to accommodate current and future growth. The action would amend the capital facilities element of the comprehensive plan to reflect the capital facilities plan that the council approved back in this spring. This is something that's required by the Growth Management Act. It requires that those documents align, and that's why we're basically doing this action. Interestingly enough, there's really no changes to the capital facility element's goals or policies. When we got into it with the Planning Commission, when they had their hearing, we identified that really we only have to change updating some of the descriptions, staffing levels, and rebuilt fire station information in the document that talks about some of the background data. We didn't actually have to make a change to the policy, so that's a very straightforward proposal. The second one's a little more involved, and that's, of course, minimum development levels within activity centers. And now, activity centers are basically areas within the city that were created in 2002 to focus growth along major transportation corridors. Also to encourage mixed uses where you have a combination of types of uses. These areas accommodate a substantial portion of the city's growth targets. We're talking at least 20% of the population target and up to 65% of the employment target. Very important areas for the city of Bothell. This also helps to avoid increased population growth within established residential neighborhoods. This is part of the strategy the city implemented. Let's create these activity centers where we put a lot of focus growth and basically allow the residential areas to stay as they are currently. One of the things that we did with this process is that we kind of looked at some provisions here. And, I'm going to go back to this one. We actually contacted the Owners Association of these major business parks within that. We had some discussion with most of them. Interestingly enough, most of them are fairly supportive of this approach. The one concern that two of them had was, well, what about the potential for non-conforming? We addressed that within the regulations proposed by the Planning Commission to make sure that if you did have an existing building you wanted to expand it, you wouldn't have to be faced with those new floor area ratios. So we received a lot of positive comments from most of the folks. Canyon Park was a little bit different because it's a much more complex area. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Interestingly enough, within our activity centers, we don't currently have a density cap. In other words, you're allowed to put in whatever you can fit within the building that the site and building regulations establish. Building height, setbacks, and things like that. Parking and all those things. Once you figure that out, you can put whatever you can fit within that envelope. However, there's also no minimum established within these areas. We didn't set up a minimum density or a minimum floor area ratio or any of those kinds of things, which is kind of unusual because every other residential zone in the city of Bothell has a minimum density applied. I believe that at the time it just wasn't something that was identified as something necessary. Excuse me. Within these activities areas, we allow buildings of 35 to 100 feet tall. Some areas required structured parking, and retail facilities when you go above 35 feet, and some areas have some special setbacks applied within them. One of the things I kind of wanted to talk about was that, again, all residential zones except the RIC have a minimum density, and that's an important consideration. Canyon Park is subject to the Puget Sound Regional Council regional growth center framework, which requires 45 activity units per acre be planned for the area. North Creek is subject to the King County buildable lands provisions, and that's basically where we do an analysis of how we are doing for growth within certain types of zones within the city. That buildable lands announcements provision for King County established about 50 to 80 dwelling units per acre within these activity centers is what we should be achieving. We have had some success with some of the existing development patterns and some of the older ones. They were achieving that 60 to 80, but more recently we've been getting development proposals which are at much lesser densities than that. And here's a couple of past ones that we're probably familiar with. Bisley Village, Emerald Crest, they both achieved 60 plus dwelling units per acres. Very successful RAC, compliant with those King County buildable lands assumptions. Recently, we've received some that are more along the lines of townhomes, and they are approaching more like 20 dwelling units per acre or less. That is a concern because this coming spring and fall, well, fall and spring, we're going to start reporting to King County on what we are attaining within our designations or zoning designations. And if we start having some numbers issues, we're going to have a conversation about how we address that. These minimum density and provisions would really assist with that one. Canyon Park, again, we have the Puget Sound Regional Council framework of 45 activity units. And again, an activity unit is either a human being of one form, either employee or resident. Interestingly enough, the way we can achieve that minimum is establishing some type of a minimum density and using what we call persons per household figures. Now, those are figures that were given by Office of Financial Management, the state, and PSRC. And the multiplier is about 1.5 to 1.9 persons per household for multifamily type residential provisions. So pretty simple, 45 divided by that 1.5 gets you about 30 dwelling units per acre. The Planning Commission recommendation is to go for a 35 dwelling unit per acre minimum within these activity areas. Again, just a little bit of a cushion there to make sure we do achieve that 45. And OFM may change their multiplier eventually, so we want to make sure we get that to that level. North Creek, again, something similar. King County buildable lands is assuming about 50 to 80, and a couple of those projects are much less than that. The Planning Commission recommendation is to achieve, again, a 35 dwelling units per acre provision. It's much simpler to have uniform numbers because if you have different numbers for areas, it makes it a little more confusing. And again, this is a minimum. One of the things that's interesting is that coming up with that non-residential land area provision and how to establish what the size of the development should be on there. We don't currently have in the city of Bothell what's called the floor area ratio. However, it's widely used within the Puget Sound region. Many governments use it. And what it does is it connects the building area to the lot area. And that allows us to create capacity for future employees. Particularly important for flex buildings. Canyon Park in particular has a lot of flex buildings. And essentially what will happen is the developer will build a shell, and then he will fill it up eventually with employees as they get tenants, and some of those things occur. That's a really important factor that has been used successfully within Canyon Park, as well as all the North Creek business areas. So floor area ratio is something that we'll do, and basically what it is, if you have a 10,000 square foot area, and if you have a floor area ratio of, let's say, 1, for example, you have to have a 10,000 square foot building. It can be in any configuration you so desire, but you do have to have that minimum area, and that really does set up some capacity for us. Within Canyon Park, we did some analysis to figure out what the average and median floor area ratios are within that area, and we identified there was about 4.25, 4.26 in that area. The Planning Commission recommendation is for a 0.5 floor area ratio. So it's a little bit higher than what the existing is, but again, it does get us to that level that we need to be to assure we do that activity enters. That's one of the items that is being considered as part of the appeal, by the way. North Creek is a little bit smaller floor area ratio. They're about 0.3839, and the PC recommendation is again to do a 0.50. Again, it just keeps it so it's uniform. We don't have a lot of provisions to do there. And one of the things we did set up, we set up some very strong non-conformity language. That was really important that we do that, so that if somebody had a building that has a floor area of 3, well, I'm going to do a little expansion over here. They don't have to immediately go to a 0.5. They can just incrementally increase the size of it. They don't have to meet that number. That was an important key factor that we wanted to establish. The Planning Commission has some interesting findings. First of all, these are minimum densities and floor area ratios. There is no change to the maximums established in current comprehensive plan and previous environmental reviews. As again, I identified, this was established back in 2002. These maximums were established, but no minimum. All this does is set the minimums. This also will really assist the city in retaining the RGC designation in Canyon Park, as well as meeting Bothell growth allocations within North Creek, as well as Canyon Park. So very important element for the city. And again, just kind of recap the Planning Commission recommendation for Canyon Park. Residential would be 35 dwelling units per acre. Non-residential would be 0.5. Interestingly enough, for mixed use, we came up with a dual approach. Have a 1.0 F floor area ratio, or meet at least one of those minimums, and then allow the applicant the flexibility and let him use the market, what the market is telling him to use, to fill in with the rest of it. So that's kind of an approach that we thought was kind of innovative. Met with some interest by some of the folks as well, because it allows you to get that minimum number you need, but then allows them the ability to respond to the market. So that was a pretty positive thing. North Creek, again, very similar, established 35 dwelling units per acre, non-residential 0.5, and again, the same mixed use approach, either one or the other. So I will end it at that point, ask you if you have any particular questions right off the bat, allow public testimony, have some more council questions, and then a motion to continue to December 17th. So thank you.
Thank you. We typically like to take public comment first, just so we can pile on if we need to with our questions. The first sign up is Sarah Gustafson.
My name is Sarah Gustafson. I live at 10808 Northeast 154th Place, and I've been a member of the Bothell Shorelines Board. I support this agenda bill. Thank you to the city staff, the Planning Commission, and the council for being proactive here. This bill would set a minimum of 35 homes an acre. This is a great start. In the future, I'd like the council to please study the idea of a 50 home an acre minimum. One reason for my support is economic. If Bothell makes these code updates, the city may be eligible for more regional grants, and we can grow our tax base. More money in the budget might just mean less taxes for all of us. Now, I don't live in Canyon Park or North Creek, but I have gone on record asking the Planning Commission to try and add more jobs and homes to my own neighborhood, which is the Brickyard, Norway Hill area. And that's because no matter what our neighborhood is, these updates are crucial for our environment. Bothell is growing. When it comes to the question of where to add jobs and homes, we have a choice. Do we pave over our open spaces to build new roads and subdivisions? Or do we add jobs and homes little by little in centers like Canyon Park, which already have the roads and the buses and the shops to support this growth? My husband, my two little boys, and I love the green spaces all across Bothell, whether it's North Creek or green belts across the city. These spaces are essential to Bothell's character, and these green spaces are what we preserve when we plan carefully for growth. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Bill Root. You decline giving comment? Okay. Did you mean to sign up for a different sheet? Oh, your name's right here, sir. I'm just kidding. All right, next person is Amanda Olson.
Hi, my name is Amanda Olson. I live at 23009 2nd Avenue Southeast, which is 9 blocks from 228th and Bothell Everett Highway. Sarah is much better at talking than I am, so I want to echo everything that she said and just say that as a Canyon Park resident, I really support this change, and I hope the council will go forward with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Gary, is it Yao? Y-A-O? Okay. And then you have a cohort. You guys can each take turns if you'd like, or do you want to share the same 3 minutes? Well, one of you gets 3 and the other one gets 3. Can we do that? Sure. You can get up there together, though. It's okay. So we got the duel, Gary Yao and Andrea Toll?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm Andrea Tull. I'm the bus base project manager for Sound Transit. And I wanted to say thank you to Bothell Council and staff and the Planning Commission for supporting us, working together collaboratively about the bus base project and also about I-405 bus rapid transit and 522 bus rapid transit. There'll be 7 stations in Bothell, and the bus base is very important to that. So we have some concerns that we sent you in a letter today. We have concerns about the proposed minimum non-residential requirement of the 0.5 FAR because we need space in our site for buses to circulate, so we can't develop out the whole site. The buses need to come in and be washed and staged and repaired and parked for service of the facility. So we ask that you consider revising the code amendments to exempt or at the least provide administrative variance processes for us to exempt public facilities such as the bus base and other regional transit facilities from complying with the minimum FAR requirement. And now I'd like to introduce my coworker, Gary Yao, who is a senior land use permitting administrator who's going to elaborate a little more.
Thanks for the intro, Andrea, and good evening, council, staff members here, members of the public. As Andrea mentioned, we sent a letter to council and also shared Sound Transit's concerns with the proposed minimum floor area ratio with the Planning Commission as well as with city staff. So I'll try to keep some of these points that I have here a little bit briefer. The first concern that we have has to do with the compliance with the minimum floor area ratio simply translates into a Bus Base North project that would be impractical. As Andrea had highlighted, there is some very real site circulation and space needs for fueling, washing, cleaning, maintenance, repair, and parking of about 120 buses as well as 250 employee vehicles. Right now, in the conceptual plans that we've shared with the city during our pre-application in October, we represent about 77,000 square feet, and there really is no room to put a total of 273,992 square feet to meet the 0.5 FAR minimum. And in addition to that, unlike at the operations and maintenance facilities east in the city of Bellevue, the parcel that we're acquiring does not really have any extra room to surplus to develop as non-transit uses. And as for Sound Transit developing its own office uses or any sort of other non-transit use, it's simply a space that we cannot fill and develop for purposes that are not used for transit. With the challenges that I've described between the Bus Base North's programmatic needs as well as the proposed minimum FAR, there's also a risk of delaying the I-405 BRT and SR 522 BRT project opening dates, as the bus base will need to come before the bus delivery of the fleet for the BRT services. And with these delays, there will also be some unintended impacts to the potential viability of Canyon Park as a designated PSRC regional growth center. And Sound Transit believes that, and also concurs with the various PSRC and comp plan policies, that high capacity transit is crucial to accommodating higher levels of population and employment growth that the city is aiming for. And for those above reasons, we respectfully request that the council consider what my colleague Andrea had suggested with the exemption from the minimum FAR for essential public facilities, or at the very least an administrative variance process. We look forward to working with the city continuously, and thank you again for the opportunity to comment.
All right, thank you. That's all I have for people that have signed up. Does anybody else want to provide? Go ahead, come up and give your name for the record.
Hi, I'm Kerry Westerbeck, 9803 Northeast 183rd Street, Bothell. So I'm going to push back a little bit on Sound Transit. What we want in Canyon Park is not a big, smelly bus barn. I love Sound Transit, ride buses, have ridden it my whole life. But if we do have it, there's no reason we can't build it more densely with the stack some building there, get into the business of renting out offices, whatever. I'm in the business of designing things, and it's a pretty easy design problem, actually. I think for you guys, you've got access to lots of good designers and engineers. Make it a taller building, compile it with some office or something till you get enough stories that you can have the open space you need for the buses. I would also say 35 dwelling units per acre, good start. As others have said, really love to see you higher than that. It seems like that's about the lowest we can hit and be hitting those targets we need to. So as a sort of a Band-Aid for now, great. I do think it's too bad SEPA, which had such a good role in protecting wetlands and things like that, the natural areas for years, is now being used as a cudgel to stop good compact growth all over Seattle and Bothell and the Puget Sound. That's unfortunate that happened tonight. I did notice in the density issues, or what I should say options, there was one of the options was dictating something like 40% for parking. I think that's a real problem. I don't think you should dictate how much parking should go in a building. Let the developer figure out how much they need. A lot fewer people are driving now. A lot fewer people will be driving. And don't forget, if we build for cars, we will get cars. If we don't build for cars, we'll get fewer. We can put a lot out at the corner of each section of Canyon Park and make it shared. So it's shared by retail during the day and restaurants at night, apartments at night, things like that. Shared use parking is allowed in our code. We should really encourage it. So just a few items there. And there is no science to parking minimums. So they just were kind of passed on for decade after decade, whereas there is a lot of science. And the other things we do as a city, parking minimums, there's actually no accepted science. So let's plan for people to do other things other than drive there, and let's make it a vibrant, villagey place, and rather than a car sewer. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to provide public comment? Seeing none. All right, Mr. Blackburn, you're back. All right, is there council questions and comments? Deputy Mayor.
I have a comment about Sound Transit's comments. I don't know if you intended to make that sound like a threat, but that sounded like a threat to me. And I don't appreciate, as a council that went out on a limb to make sure that 405 BRT improvements were funded, do not appreciate being told that we're putting it at risk. We, from the very beginning, have said that that bus barn was a problem in our regional growth center. We've asked for help. We've asked for ways for Sound Transit to work with us, and they've fallen on deaf ears. So for you to come before us and say what you just did is not helpful.
Councilmember Zorns.
I have to echo that. That sounded like a threat when there's been a lot of hard work that's gone into make that area have a future, and that threat was not helpful. Mr. Blackburn, couple questions. Can you help me kind of come up with an equivalent, because we're not making a decision tonight, but can you help me come up with an equivalent? I know we have unlimited density here we've already kind of got this first phase one of growth for Bothell here in downtown. Can you give me an idea of how that compares with the 35 units as a minimum being suggested for Canyon Park? Like, do we have a minimum here for downtown?
Sorry, hold on. I do have quite a few downtown examples that we shared with the Planning Commission at one time. And this basically kind of shows what the downtown areas are getting for their floor area ratios as well as their achieved densities. And these are existing developments. And you can see the floor area ratios are in the upper 2s to low 4s. And the achieved densities are in the 80s to 100 plus units per acre. Interestingly enough, even a couple townhome projects have a fairly high floor area ratio. These are very big townhome projects, and their density may not be huge, but their floor area ratio is that. So that gives you kind of an idea of what the scale is occurring within the downtown area.
So if my math is correct here, it's what's being suggested as a minimum base for Canyon Park area is anywhere from, help me with the math here. It's a sixth of what's going on here?
It is much smaller than what we are seeing in downtown, yes.
Okay. And then the other question I have, and I think you answered this, is that this is just the groundwork here, that we can adjust these numbers later and require more density for our final approval?
That's a good question, yes. And in fact, one of the things that makes this a little tough is that this is a little bit in advance of our sub-area planning process we're going through, or Canyon Park. And we're going through a lot of analysis that'll really help inform what we should establish for minimums within that process. We'll be back here in a number of months having some more discussions with the council about what those numbers are showing. But you're right, these are going to be kind of almost an interim step.
Okay, so, and then we can make our decisions on the live-work ratios, and, I mean, if we want it.
Yes, the idea behind that is that when we start doing the selection of a preferred alternative, and that's really kind of when we get into that kind of a discussion, okay, what is the mix of uses that we want to apply within Canyon Park?
Okay, just want to make sure that we haven't burned that bridge. And then also the other question that I have is, I've saved all my old maps from my planning commission days, and so I was looking at a map on liquefaction zones because I saw reference to buildings in some areas being 100 to 150 feet tall, and so I see Canyon Park looks like it's in the clear for, having to accommodate liquefaction. Are we talking about buildings that size for the North Creek area?
Yes, we are. One of the things that's kind of interesting is that there's a bunch of techniques they use when they build within those areas. And I can take just some of the locations in the business park where the buildings are exactly where they were 25, 30 years ago when they were built. The parking lots have sunk and they've had to build some steps. So they use some really special, auger cast piles and all those things to really get a firm grip on the buildings so that they don't sink. But right now, the North Creek is allowed up to 100 feet tall.
Okay, that would be fascinating to see. I would like to see that. And I think that is all the sum total of my questions, so thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody on this side of the dais? Councilmember McAuliffe, you good? You good? Okay. Did you want to go last, or do you want? I have some questions. Okay. Mr. Blackburn, is there a variance process for the Canyon Park sub-area?
Not right now. And it's not proposed within the Planning Commission draft either.
Is there a variance process in other areas?
There is a variance process. Somebody can seek a variance to provisions of the zoning code, which this would be a part of. However, it's a very difficult process. It requires some very unique circumstances and minimum necessary to make reasonable use of the land, those kind of items. It's a pretty rare event when the hearing examiner is able to issue that type of a decision for a variance.
Okay. The bus barn, so when does vesting occur?
When they submit a complete building permit, or a site plan approval permit is what we use nowadays.
Okay. The 35 dwelling units per acre, does that meet our designated target for our regional growth center as kind of designed? It's kind of, we're getting the cart before the horse here, but is that what you're feeling from your analysis would be an adequate number, or should it be higher?
35 should probably get us to, again, we're trying to get up a minimum, and certainly an ideal number would be more. But I believe that will be occurring with the Canyon Park sub-area plan. And one of the things we're trying to do with that is we're trying to come up with a really logical approach where we say, okay, if you're close to transit facilities, you get a little higher density. If you're a little bit further away, you have a little bit lower density. We're trying to make a fairly nuanced approach on the density numbers. So it will vary quite a bit, but it will be up in the pretty high area.
Okay. So there was a comment made about the PSRC Regional Growth Center designation. I believe that we did have conversations with PSRC when the bus barn was targeted for that its specific location now.
Yeah.
Can you refresh our memory on what that?
Essentially what PSRC staff have identified, and again, we're talking really early stages here, but they are identifying that they do not know of a provision where we could have some type of a varying level of activity units. I mean, those framework are pretty well set at a certain number. And I would hate to speculate on what the options would be, because there's so many different things we could do, but anywhere from taking it out in the middle of an RGC and not have that part of an RGC, that's just crazy, honestly. That's bad planning, honestly. So it's a tough situation. We have the designation. It's been designated that way since the mid-1990s. It's no surprise that it is a regional growth center.
Okay. And then if the council so desired to report back to the Puget Sound, I guess it is the appropriate body, the Puget Sound Regional Council, or no, I'm sorry, let me take that back. The Sound Transit Board, to let them know that there's been some sentiment given to us that's basically threatening from their staff.
That would be something for the council to have a discussion about.
Okay. And then I just have a quick comment. So the Regional Growth Center, so the whole intention behind a regional growth center is to accommodate a lot of growth in one dense area. And if we don't achieve those targets in that area, then that growth needs to be accommodated throughout the city. And what we've seen in the last couple years, I would say, we've had these, I don't know if you have that slide to go back to about those densities. But this is what was alarming, I believe, for the city, is that those ones.
There you go.
I think all 6 of those are all, I mean, that's market driven. So people really like to have townhomes. The builders like to build them because they're highly profitable. But the problem is that, great, we have those built, but that density actually needs to go somewhere else. So we need to accommodate that growth throughout the city. And I am in full support of developing minimum requirements. It's interesting that the SEPA determination is being used harbor not doing this, because this is one of the most environmentally mindful things I think cities have done over the last few decades, is to try to make sure that we try to have dense urban development so that we reduce the amount of sprawl that we see throughout our region. So I'm in full support of it. I don't know if this will come back while I'm still on council, but if the rest of council is interested, I think it would be appropriate for us to write a letter to the Sound Transit Board to let them know that, ask them to watch the video from the comments tonight. And with that, Councilmember McNeil. Oh, we have another one. Do you want to go last still? Okay, Councilmember Agnew.
No, I just would like to appreciate us saying something to Sound Transit about this, because I felt intimidated, or didn't feel intimidated, but I felt threatened by the comments that were made by their representatives. And I truly think we need to send them a letter.
Councilmember McNeil.
Thank you, Mayor. And I too would echo the comments that have been made by the other council members as far as the takeaway, the feeling. But I do have a couple questions. One is, in the Planning Commission recommended a 35.
Yes.
And in thinking long-term planning, if we set that minimum at 35, what happens if we don't reach our target with the 35?
Well, hopefully we will use this as a minimum to encourage a little bit more dense development within our activity centers. That's important that we do that. And the next time we do our buildable lands analysis, we will be at the much closer number to where our assumed densities are. This is kind of one of those kind of unique situations that I can tell you that when that was first established, the activity centers were first established, nobody thought that we'd be looking at townhomes within these areas. It was just not thought of. And the first couple developments we got were exactly concordant with our desire, is to have a very dense, compact urban feel there. So I believe that for this round of the buildable lands, we should be okay because we do have some of those things. But and I can point to the minimum. We're having those discussions now. That's why I'm trying to think how we can do this, approach this. But yeah, it is a potential issue for the city.
Could I add something to that? Excuse me, council member. Yes. Just to elaborate a little bit on what Bruce was just talking about, could you go back to the persons per household slide that you have? I think it's important to keep in mind that when we set a minimum of 35, as far as activity units, it's not 35 activity units. It's actually generating more people than that in terms of residents. So we are getting closer to that 45 activity units per acre. And we're setting a minimum. We're not setting a maximum. One of the requirements of the regional growth center criteria is that we demonstrate how we can accommodate a minimum of 45 activity units per acre. So as long as we're not setting our maximum below that helps as well. So staff is comfortable at the 35 at this point based on the analysis we've been able to do so far. As Bruce mentioned, as we go through the Canyon Park sub-area plan and do additional analysis and look at the different land use scenarios that we'll end up with there, we may want to adjust that number at that time based on the analysis we have going forward.
So there will be opportunity to adjust.
Absolutely.
As we go, so we're not losing.
And that's the first opportunity and probably the best opportunity that we see to really refine that number. And at some point in the future as well, if we see we're not achieving what we need to, then we can go back and adjust that number as well. We can amend those numbers at any time. We just need to do the analysis to get a good handle on what the right number is at that point.
Okay. I tend to agree, and I'm supportive. I just want to be cautious to make sure that we're planning accordingly and properly for the future, because to lose the designation that we have at Canyon Park, we've all fought so hard to get that designation, and we cannot afford to lose it. It has much more impact on our community for raising grant funding and things like that, state, local, regional. So I want to make sure of that. The next question, and I'm kind of unsure of this, but to me, something that was interesting that was brought up tonight was about the buses, the number of buses that are going to be going through there and who and what they're servicing. And I thought I heard the number of 120 buses, 250 employee vehicles, 7 stations. Those things were rattled off pretty quickly. And I have a concern around, to me, 120 buses seems like a lot of buses. I mean, how many trips a day is that going to equate to coming out of that area? And what is that? There's a lot of infrastructure. There's a lot going on there, and that seems to me like it's a big push. It's a big impact on the community, on the city of Bothell. Am I incorrect in assuming that?
I think, and one of the things that we're kind of at the early stages, we've only had a pre-application conference with the Sound Transit at this state. We don't actually have their full analysis as to how their operation will envision. But it does have an impact, and I know that one of the things that the Canyon Park Owners Association has identified, I think it's in your letter, that the exhibit they provided, is that they're concerned about the impact on their private roadways as well. That is something that they have raised as an issue, and I think it's a legitimate issue to be discussed, and I think that we just haven't got to that point with Sound Transit yet where we had that conversation.
Okay, and as far as understanding, then, I think there was a mention of it's 77,000 square feet, or the acreage and all that. What if you put a bus barn there? What actually are we losing as far as the density, the units available to us that we're going to have to push onto some other part of our community?
Yeah, and see, that's one of the things where it gets kind of, you got to pull up your crystal ball, because it just depends on what type of the building it would be. If it's a non-residential, the latest proposal we had in the Canyon Park area for a non-residential project was a 1.4 FAR. So that was a pretty good sized building, a lot of employees. if you're going to get the 50 some odd dwelling units per acre of the other one, we're talking about 1,000, 1,500. Oh, I'm trying to do the math real quickly, I'm sorry. We're talking a significant number of activity units that the city could potentially lose.
And what does the activity units do for us?
I'm sorry, an activity unit is either an employee or a resident. And essentially what that is, you know, depending upon how many units you have, and you apply one of these multipliers, you say, okay, well, you get X number of activity units on that piece of property because you have 100 residential units, you got 1,500 activity units, you're good, or something like that. And that's basically what it is just a calculation that PSRC goes through. And one of the interesting things about the floor area ratio is that we want to set the capacity so that we have that ability to fill in with future employees. And the interesting thing that we learned while we've been doing the Canyon Park work is that since 2012, we've almost had 3,200 new employees within Canyon Park. That's amazing. We've not added 1 square foot of building. That's because we had a lot of capacity to use. I'm not sure how much capacity we have left out there. So in the next phase will be somebody adding another flex building, for example, or something like that. And we want to make sure that that capacity is there so we can continue to have that employment growth.
So I did the math real quick while Bruce was talking. At 275 employees on 12.5 acres is 22 activity units per acre.
22 per acre?
Yes.
Okay. And that would just be for employment?
It's an activity unit. It counts, yeah.
Both ways?
Yeah, it's just total activity units. It could be residents or employees.
Okay. Okay. And then parking was brought up as well by somebody previously. And
yes.
Parking always concerns me specifically because of if we don't plan for parking and we need parking, you know, for the type of businesses that are going to be out there, we'd love everybody to be on a bus, but that's just not going to happen. How do we plan for that to make sure that we don't have a parking issue? And is that something we need to plan for? Or?
Well, in fact, one of the things that we have opened up in the sub-area plan is the discussion about parking, and it's setting some new ratios. Currently, what this proposal does, this only sets the minimum. It doesn't really address the parking numbers or change some of the provisions. And I think one of the things that I think it was Mr. Westerbeck identified was that there was a provision in the code currently that requires a certain amount of the building floor area to be in structured parking. And we didn't change any of that stuff. We kept as much of the provisions in place now as they are, only adding the minimum, trying not to make a lot of changes to that provision. That's going to happen with the Canyon Park sub-area plan. We're going to have a lot of discussion about parking ratios.
All right. Well, I guess in closing, I'd just like to thank you for the amount of work that you and the staff does on this. It's important that we as council members are educated and we can help educate the community that when we make fast, quick decisions on things, they can have a profound impact in the future. And we need to get this right because this is one of the last areas that we have that we need to plan properly for so that we can adhere to the Growth Management Act as well as ensure that our growth is done properly. So thank you for all the hard work on this.
Thank you.
City Manager, do you feel like you have a majority of council to send Sound Transit a letter requesting a review of this tape?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Okay. Is there a motion to continue this hearing to December 17th?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by, let's give that one to Councilmember McNeil to continue this public hearing to December 17th. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, please your vote. Passes unanimously. We're on to AB 19-208, public hearing to consider adoption of ordinance approving the 2020 transportation impact fees. And we have Mr. Benson, and there he is. Officially opening the public hearing.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, and members of the public. Boyd Benson, Public Works, and with us tonight is Sarah Keenan from Fear and Pierce, our transportation consultant, and we'll be discussing the proposed 2020 transportation impact fee update. This type of update is a periodic update as outlined in Bothell Municipal Code, and it's to ensure that we collect our fair share of developer costs for system-wide transportation improvements when the city completes capital projects that provide capacity for existing and future development. So with that, we're going to jump right in.
Okay, so a little more background on what are transportation impact fees. They are one-time charges paid to new development, and that was authorized through the 1990 Growth Management Act, and it's a funding source for transportation improvement projects. So these projects need to add capacity to the transportation network, and they can only be used to fund projects that are serving new growth. So that means they cannot be used to fund existing deficiencies. And those two things together, with that, these make sure that new development is really focusing on charging a fair share of just focusing on charging for projects that are related to new growth.
Yeah, so when you think about these projects, they're the crossroad projects or multi-way project, things that add additional lanes or transit or other components that address growth and growth trips, intersection, signalization, and the rest. So the current fee is based on the 2014 study. And when you look back at that study, it includes a transportation improvement program project list that was developed that time, and it foresaw the growth of the downtown area and other system-wide improvements within the city. That study was developed to ensure that the proportional cost share from development was borne by these transportation impact fees. Since that time, we have seen limited increases in the fees. The municipal code allows adjustment each year by the CPI, and that's usually in the range of 1% to 3%. And then once again, it authorizes periodic updates as being proposed with this public hearing today. Once again, since 2014, we have seen development capacity projects that have been completed. We have seen projects that have been completed but have additional funding, debt, long-term debt to be paid that we believe are transportation impact fee eligible. And we've also added additional capacity projects, and those were recently adopted within the May adoption of the 2020-2025 Transportation Improvement Program project list, and also previously as outlined in the Capital Facilities Program Plan. So Sarah's going to tell us a bit about the methodology. It's a relatively simple approach. It's a numerator and a denominator and some simple math, but to get to that point, it takes a little bit of explanation. Sarah?
Yeah, so this flow chart explains the numerator portion of that equation. And we start with an eligible project list, and from there we need to estimate the growth and new trips within the city. And from that we can determine the proportionate cost share that's eligible for funding through this program. And that's the impact fee costs at the bottom of this flow chart. And we can get to an impact fee per new vehicle trip by dividing that by the growth in trips expected over the next 12 years. And we're going to go a little bit more into detail of each of the steps here.
Yeah, and once again, I say it's simple math. It's not that simple. There's a lot of detail, but you think about a long-term strategy where we have certain capacity needs. And for the projects to accommodate those capacity needs, if they cost $100, and this evaluation shows that 30 of those dollars are attributed to future growth, then you can apply that portion of the cost to that growth. And then as Sarah goes on through the flow chart, you'll see we also develop how many trips are estimated during that time period. So for that $30, if it represents 100 trips, then that's 30 cents a trip. That's not the best example with math because the numbers are quite greater, but still it's a pretty simple. So we looked at the 2014 project list. There were 12 projects with a value of about $162 million. Of that, about $40 million, about 25% was transportation impact fee eligible. Since that time, 7 of the projects were completed. 5 projects were not completed, so they've been retained for this current eligible project list. These are capacity projects that we can continue to keep on the list and keep impact fee eligible. And then 5 new projects were added from the 2020 to 2025 Capital Facilities Plan and Transportation Improvement Program. And what's really important about these projects is these aren't projects that are simply added because the city thinks they'll do the work. These are projects that are added because they're in the Capital Facilities Plan. They're budgeted for within the next 7 years. We have grants available, and we've made sure we have the revenue with respect to transportation impact fees and other funding sources to get the jobs done. And that's important because if you do not expend impact fees within 10 years, you get to return them to the developer. And the goal of the city is to make sure these projects are completed so that doesn't happen, and that development pays their fair share for each of the projects. And we'll go further in depth on these numbers as we continue with the flow chart. Sarah?
So that $223.3 million, that's the total cost of the eligible projects, but we can't fund all of those projects through this program. So instead, the first step is to analyze existing deficiencies. So as I said earlier, if there are any existing deficiencies in the network, these funds can't be used for those projects. So looking at the city's traffic data as well as the level of service standard, there are no existing deficiencies in the area of these projects. So we can fund all $223.3 million is needed to address future growth. So some of this future growth is actually growth occurring outside of the city of Bothell, and we can't use these funds for that. For example, a vehicle traveling through the city of Bothell, not making any stops, is unrelated to growth within the city of Bothell, but may still require some transportation projects. So in order to capture that, we ran the travel model in the area of these projects and averaged to 31% of new trips in this area is related to growth within the city. So based on that 31%, we can fund $68.7 million of the project list.
And one point to add here, these type of projects that are system-wide actually benefit development. If you look at the projects that have been done by the city to accommodate growth within the downtown core, to have a developer come in and propose a project and have to complete those capital works because their development is going to kick an intersection over into failure or something is really expensive. So by implementing this program, we use economy of scales. We can obtain grants and we can get the work done well ahead of growth. And so instead of telling a project, okay, you're the trip that just kicked this intersection or this link into failure, you're going to fix this, which is really expensive. Instead, you can pay your fair share as a transportation impact fee. So I think that's a real important message to keep in mind. And it looks like I kind of got ahead of myself on that. So we do look at the proportionate share, and as Sarah mentioned, it's 31%. That's an average. Each project is actually evaluated to see how much is new in city development growth, and that ranges from, let's say, 19 to 38 up to 70%. So that's a proportionate share from impact fees. What about the other funds needed? These are grants. These are grants that the city has been very aggressive to obtain. These are other funding partners, Sound Transit or other folks that come in are doing improvements along corridors. We have Snohomish County mitigation fees. So there's an agreement with the city that development within Snohomish County that's immediately adjacent and then out to, I think, a mile beyond our city limits actually pays a portion of a fee because those trips impact the city. And then other revenue sources. And some of that is just opportunities to try to bundle projects or do other good, smart planning and development. And another real kicker is periodic updates like this to make sure that we're generating and collecting the fees generated by development in a fair way to make sure that they're paying their appropriate share of the cost. Those fees are used for matching for grants because we have secured revenue sources, and it's a way to make sure we can fund these projects to completion.
Okay, so we got to the $60.9 million that's eligible to be funded through this program. And as a 12-year program, we looked at 12 years worth of growth within the city of Bothell, and this comes from PSRC data. And using ITE standards, we estimated 6,000 new PM peak hour trips within the city of Bothell because of this growth. And that's the denominator. So we get to $10,156 per trip. And this is about 37% higher than the existing fee. And this fee per trip gets distributed to new development based on the number of new trips associated with that land use during the PM peak hour.
And that's a real important one to just discuss briefly. The rate here, the 10,156, is simple math. This is what each new trip, its share of burden for these projects. Different type of development have different trip generation rates, and there's a range for each type of development. So a commercial development may have a certain rate per square foot. A school may be per seat. A residential unit may be per unit. So there have been some questions. Should we be looking at this as a whole program and apply this rate across all schedule of charges items? And Sarah will be talking about schedule of charges in a minute. Or is it more appropriate to look at each individual use? Staff believes that this is a rate that's justifiable, and as we'll talk about in a few future slides, if there is some concern with respect to affordable housing or low income or other type of uses, there is flexibility, not necessarily changing this number, because if you reduce this number, we'll have to find funds to complete these projects elsewhere. But you can look at the actual trip generation rate for each of these different uses. And in the future, if council wishes to have special provisions for those type of uses, we can address it very simply by looking at trip generation rates, which Sarah will be discussing right now.
Okay, so you all have a copy of the proposed fee schedule. This is an example of one of the land uses within the fee schedule. So there are several land uses available. This is a single family house, and you can see the unit of measure is dwelling, which means it gets charged per single family home. As Boyd mentioned, it could also, based on the land use, be charged per square foot or something like that. So to get the actual rate per single family home, we multiply the new trip rate by a trip length adjustment factor by the cost per PM peak hour trip, and we get a cost per unit of measure. So in this example, we use ITE trip generation rates and ITE standards to estimate the number of new PM peak hour trips based on a new trip percentage and a basic trip rate from the ITE trip generation manual. And in this example, the result was 0.99 new trips per PM peak hour. And we get a trip length adjustment factor by estimating the trip length for a land use and the average trip length within the city of Bothell. In this example, the result is 0.95, and we multiply it by the impact fee rate to get a fee per unit of measure. For the single family dwelling unit, the result is $9,511.
And just to add to this, ITE, Institute for Transportation Engineers, this is a group that has lots of resources. One resource is the Trip Generation Manual, which we're currently using the 9th edition, and now we'll be going to the 10th edition. And what this does is looks at traffic count and trip generation information for different types of land use across the U.S. And so when you see the 0.99 PM peak hour trips, what that means is on average across the U.S., a single family residential unit will generate 0.99 trips between 4 and 6 p.m. during the peak rush hour. Now, what we've noted on this slide is, let's say we're looking at multifamily. Multifamily within the fee schedule is an average rate of 0.45. However, that is an average. The rate that's published varies from 0.15 to 1.11. So as I mentioned before, if we're looking at future modifications for affordable housing or low income or disabled uses, let's say in conjunction with community development updates next year, it may be more appropriate to look at rates that are lower if you have affordable housing for this type of use, because they may generate fewer trips. Now, currently, that's not included on our fee schedule. An applicant always has the right to come in and propose changes or propose a study that demonstrates that their type of use will generate fewer trips. And a good case that should come to mind are the historic Main Street trip generation rates, which we worked with Fair and Pierce on. And the concern was, well, there's a lot of existing use on historic Main Street. We think a lot of these trips will be generated by adjacent uses, and council approved lower trip generation rates for those type of uses in those areas. So it's this looking at this as a rate, which is the per trip fee of 10,156, and then as a set rate, but then looking at alternatives for trip generation for different uses may be a good way to go to address future concerns. Oops.
And here's an example of other local jurisdictions' rate for a single-family home. And I've highlighted both the existing rate for Bothell and the proposed 2020 rate for Bothell. And you can see several of these were updated in 2019, but not all of them, because kind of on a rolling time frame. But many of them do have annual escalations associated with them.
And we did look at, there are published studies that show trip generation or impact fee rates from different municipalities, and we actually researched these municipalities to see if they had any upcoming updates, and they just happened to either not have them in the queue yet, or they're not published. So these are the most current rates we can find. And then in summary, we believe the proposed approach fairly assesses traffic burden and associated costs to development, and that the proposed impact fee rate is a fair portion to accommodate future growth within system-wide transportation improvement projects. It does address the recently adopted transportation improvement program to make sure that we can adequately fund those in the future. And it really does promote responsible development. This is an opportunity for development to buy into system improvements instead of doing them on their own, which is usually quite expensive. The city can complete projects to accommodate growth in a good, holistic, sustainable manner. And it also allows for potential future generation rate adjustments. And we've listed historic Main Street and potential future low-income, disabled, or affordable housing options. And once again, the applicant always has the opportunity to demonstrate that their rates, trip generations rates, may be differ than our fee schedule, which is just really a tool to say, this is what you can use if you don't want to do a separate study to demonstrate a lower rate. And once again, you had a presentation about Canyon Park. If that proposal is adopted in the future, there may be future improvement program projects that have to be added. And this type of evaluation will occur again to make sure that we are collecting the fair share of development costs for future projects identified to accommodate that growth. Anything else you want to? Okay. Oh, and just one quick follow-up. Besides publishing the hearing notice, we also emailed, I think, 43 members of our Development Services Advisory Group, which are developers that meet with city staff to discuss concerns, and we had one response, to my knowledge, and it was simply a question whether these rates apply to all different classes on the fee schedule, and the answer is yes.
Okay, thank you. We're going to take public comment. So the only person signed up is Carrie Westerbeck.
I'm back, double dipping tonight. Carrie Westerbeck, 9803 Northeast 183rd Street. So I'm not anti-impact fee. They have a place. It's how we pay for things. But a few things that may not have been thought about. Well, I saw the projects on the consultant's map, and they all look really auto-oriented, auto-centric. I'm curious, like, we're going to be moving to a time when people are going to want to get around on e-bikes and scooters and everything else. And are some of those fees, I hope in the future, going to go to like dedicated separated bike lanes? We really could use one, say, between Canyon Park and downtown. It would get heavily used, so people could feel safe. All different kinds of bike cyclists could feel safe, not having to compete with space for cars. Something else to think about: traffic impact fees, along with parking minimums, are poison pills for small businesses and small developers. There's probably a lot of really cool, interesting little parcels, especially downtown, but other places as well, where because a small business, maybe they saved up $50,000, $100,000 to do a business, but oh wait, I have to have 3 times as much land because of the parking, and wait, what's the impact fee because it's a change of use to that old gas station? Oh man, I mean that's assuming it's not a brownfield, right? They're just sunk. Day one, they're sunk. That happens a lot. We all know it happened at the furniture store multiple times before anyone got in there. And then we got another furniture store, which is great. It's a nice addition to town. So that's just something to keep in mind when we're increasing impact fees of all kinds. And I did read in some cities they're considering zoned impact fees. So if they want development in some places, say in their downtown, they want infill, lots of the infrastructure is already paid for. They say, you know, hey, they're less if you build where we already have streets and wires and pipes and stuff we paid for mostly. And a lot of people walk and ride bikes in this area or something like that. And then if you're going to go out and rip down New Forest, or maybe we could have a park, or it's low density sprawl that doesn't pay for itself. Maybe those impact fees should be the full amount. I think my time's just about up. That was the point I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you. Is anybody else wanting to provide public comment? Seeing none. Council questions? Deputy Mayor?
Thank you for the presentation. I had a couple questions and needed some clarification. So I'm remembering back to our discussions about Main Street and the impact fees and how we reduce them. But I also want to clarify for council and the public that those impact fees are only paid on change of use of existing buildings, correct?
Mostly correct, yes. If it is a change of use that develops more trips than the pre-existing use, they are impact fee eligible.
And so I probably should have asked this sooner, but I assume then that with your calculations that you showed earlier, there's some sort of adjustment for what is it by occupancy load of a, say, a retail space, or how does that get calculated with the rate?
So the rates are general rates from that Institute of Transportation Engineers, the ITE generation rate manual, and that's what populates the fee schedule. What happened with the historic Main Street rates, I think I'm going to answer your question, is that each time an applicant came in that wanted to demonstrate that they were generating fewer trips in the fee schedule, they had to do a whole separate evaluation.
Right. No, I guess what I'm asking is if you're just, say, wanting to go from, let's say, a retail space like the furniture store to a restaurant where the occupancy load is much higher, how does that get calculated in the what you showed in terms of the numbers?
For sure. So what would happen is you'd look at the existing use and the trip generation from that use. Let's say the furniture store generated, and Sarah will probably jump in, 10 trips during the PM peak hour. A restaurant, depending on the type, may have fewer trips, or if it's a high turnover restaurant, may have more trips. So let's say that they calculate that the restaurant generates 15 trips. So you just take the difference of 15 minus 10, and that would be the impact fee.
So you have a standard schedule
Yes.
for those things?
Yeah.
Councilmember Olson's like, I could answer that.
No, well, that's the kicker. The schedule
And he
is
could have.
a standard schedule that people can use if they choose, or they can do a separate study.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure people understood. It's not, impact fees aren't being charged on everybody who opens a new business. It's if they open a business in a new building or in a change of use where it's a higher occupancy rate during PM peak hour.
Higher trip generation.
Trip generation. Thank you. So I had another question. Do any of the TIP projects on the list include bike lanes? For instance, is 527 on that TIP list, and I assume that includes a bike lane.
Several of the projects do include bike lanes. They also include sidewalks. With this type of program, Mr. Westerbeck brought up a good point. Bike lanes and sidewalks are important improvements that do reduce vehicle trips potentially and could provide additional capacity. And some of those costs are eligible for transportation impact fee programs. And this is something that we'd like to look at in the future, because to do that, you really have to have the basis for those type of improvements. You should be looking at these at the comprehensive plan level, the capital facilities plan level, and the TIP level to help demonstrate that we've identified all these non-motorized projects and we think they're going to provide additional capacity. Therefore, we think a portion of them are transportation impact fee eligible.
So have we fully integrated our bike plan with the TIP yet? Or I know that we just did one last year. Am I asking too hard a question? I'm so sorry. It just occurred to me.
That's okay. Just different staff working on different things. So we have not completed our bike plan yet. And
Oh, okay.
come back to council probably next year is my estimate.
Okay. It would be interesting, I think, to try to start to integrate those things. And then I think it's important to Mr. Westerbeck's point, if we get BRT, which now seems to be under threat, certainly Canyon Park we can expect more people to be riding buses and stuff. And does that shouldn't change anything, though, in terms of our impact fees or whatnot, at least for this round. It would impact future impact fee changes.
Correct. Those type of growth projects aren't envisioned in the current transportation improvement program list or capital facilities plan list or the comprehensive plan even. But should those revisions be adopted, all those different planning tools would be updated and we'd be looking at revising this program. One thing that the city does is we do look at a uniform fee for the entire city. That may or may not be appropriate with Canyon Park. That's something to be looked at that time. But you look at the downtown core, they have, it's more of a recovery contract, but they have higher fees for, let's say, it's more of a recovery contract. But there's been a lot of investment in that area. Does Canyon Park warrant some separate impact fee approach? And I know Fair and Pierce looks at different cities that have multiple impact fees based on different generation rates. Do you want to?
So I think in this case, it would be similar to what you have done in the historic Main Street area of just adopting a lower rate for a specific area, which is allowed.
Yeah, actually, it was a perfect segue for my next question, which was the concept of zoned impact fees, because it seems to me if we have BRT stop at Canyon Park, then that would be the perfect opportunity to zone for a lower rate, because we're expecting more commuting by bus. But I'm just wondering if you had thought about that.
There's been no evaluations, but please be aware that if that additional growth requires more improvements in that area, there could be some high costs to accommodate that growth. And so it could produce a lower rate for the area, or it could potentially produce a higher rate. But that's something that is looked at in the future with council involvement and experts like Fair and Pierce.
Okay, and last question, sorry, this question just occurred to me. So public agencies don't get a pass on traffic impact fees, do they?
Not in this, no, not in the city.
So Sound Transit will be paying a full impact fee for whatever their trip numbers are, whether it be 22 or 35?
Yeah, I may ask our transportation engineer, Wasim Khan, to address this, but on a project of that magnitude, there would most likely be a separate study that would be rigorously, they wouldn't be using our fee schedule.
Oh, okay.
It'd be a separate study. Wasim, do you want to add anything to that?
Like our city hall building, they paid.
I can't actually hear you very well.
Could you use the mic, please?
Thanks.
Like, for example, the city hall building, they paid their traffic impact fee, their share.
Oh, we paid ourselves our traffic impact fees?
Yeah, the school district, that's public agency, they paid their fees.
Okay.
So there is no, consideration for public agency. But for Sound Transit, I think they have not developed the transportation study yet. So they have to do their study, that especially the trip generation rates, and assessment of traffic impact fee will be also included.
Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to say I'm in support of the impact fees. I do have the same concerns Mr. Westerbeck brought up, in that are our impact fees becoming so high that they're actually squashing small business startups that aren't franchises or corporations, and it's just something that weighs on me, and I don't know the answer. It's just something that I sort of suspect. But again, it's only on those change of uses, so maybe it's not as big a deal. So, but I thank you for all the information. It was a great presentation.
Councilman Agnew.
Thank you for your presentation. It was very enlightening. I know in our packet it said the fees are going up about 37%. And when I looked at it, it seemed like some of them were going down, like light industry, warehouses, storage were all going down, and yet daycare, junior high, fast food, car sales almost doubled.
So that 37% increase is just based off that fee per PM peak hour trip. So you'll notice, yes, some of the land uses have decreased in actual fee per unit of measure. And the reason for that is because ITE put out a new trip generation manual this year. So all those rates have been adjusted based on the expected number of new PM peak hour trips for land use. So that might get reflected in actually ending up with a lower rate for a certain land use, even though the fee per new trip is higher.
Okay. Well, I too support this. I was around when we first implemented impact fees, and that was a little controversial at the time, and I think it'll always be controversial. But I think the city should have some of the developers pay for part of the infrastructure that's needed in the city for us to grow. So thank you very much.
Councilmember McAuliffe, sorry.
Thank you. And thank you for your presentation. I have a couple questions regarding a little bit of historic perspective, if you could. So what we talked about was if a business wanted to do their own impact fee study, that could occur, and it might be up or down compared to what we have here, correct? Historically, has that been done, or how does that, what would you analyze that as?
So larger developments, typically, yes, they will look at these numbers very carefully. They have the resources, they'll look at pass-by trips, similar to the reduction factors with that trip length factor. It's just different. They'll look at trips that are already coming through that aren't ending, trip ends. So they will propose something to Mr. Kwan, who reviews this. It says, well, it's 100 units, but there's already 80 trips here, which we do, and we think that 10 of those trips are pass-by trips to something else, so we only think we should be paying 10 trip fee units, and then Mr. Khan will review that and go from there. So I would say all of the larger, Wasim, do you?
I think even in our impact fee program, we have those recognized by IT, those pass-by trips rates are already considered. But if some special land use, they think their trip generation would be less than what we have included in part of the IT trip generation manual, they can do so, and we review that, and if it's reasonable, then we approve that reduced rate.
Okay.
And it has been done in the past.
Yes, that's what I was looking for, yes.
Of course, with the approval of Public Works Director.
And then I guess I just want to ask why some of the areas for historic Main Street are left blank. So it would be like home improvement store was 5.38 and now it's blank. So why is this?
So some of the land uses that were available in the last update of this are no longer considered for ITE. So there has been some consolidation within the trip generation manual, and some land uses have just been removed. For example, there's no more video rental store. There are several different multifamily units that existed last time that are now consolidated into 3. So that's an example of a land use that's no longer considered for ITE.
Okay, and then I guess I'm just a little concerned, one of the things we're trying to attract around or in historic Main Street would be a convenience market, and that went up quite a bit. Can you explain why that went up so high?
So the number did go up based on the current trip generation rate, but it had already been reduced as part of the historic Main Street adjustment. So the math that Fair and Pierce helped us with is it used to be this trip generation rate, and we reduced it to here. Now the current trip generation for that use is this, so we can reduce it to a proportional reduction. Does that? Yeah. So you will see increases, but it's proportionally less than what the manual would require.
Okay, because I would really be concerned that we're trying to attract certain entities, around historic Main Street or on, and we need to be really aware of what we're going to be charging them for the tip fee. Thank you.
Councilmember Olson.
Thank you for the presentation. I think the last time I used the ITE handbook, it was like the 6th edition, so it's a good refresher. So do you know if, I know we kind of have some quasi-zoned impact fees, but are there other cities that have like truly incorporated impact zone fees in the region or close by?
We happen to have another Fair and Pierce representative here who knows quite a bit. Mr. Don Samdahl, if you could maybe address this.
Hi, Don Samdahl with Fair and Pierce. Yes, historically there have been cities that have adopted zone-based systems. Now it's more typical at the county level. For example, Snohomish County has several different areas, and you can understand that because of the size. Actually, over the past few years, cities that used to have a zone-based system like Redmond and Bellevue, for example, have gone more to a citywide program because of the trips being dispersed throughout the city. And because they were encountering situations where the rates in one zone might be substantially different than the rates in an immediately adjacent zone. And so it's certainly possible to do that. And if the council, perhaps with the Canyon Park area, when that gets completed, that might be one that might be certainly worth looking at on a zone-based system. But it's certainly something that could be done.
All right, yeah, because I mean, it feels like our city definitely has different zones or different regions, and I'm not saying one way or the other, but it'd just be a interesting, study to look at. But I also appreciate us, doing the work to look at how costs have changed and always incorporating the latest industry standards. So, even though the number, when you look at the average of 30%, 37% going up, construction and the materials and the cost to do these roadway projects are going up. So it's not just out of thin air. I think there's definitely a basis for it. So I think it's wise to do these small incremental changes instead of just waiting 10 years or 5 years and have a really significant impact change. So thank you for the presentation. Very enlightening.
Councilmember Zorn.
Thank you. I think something that we hear from the citizens a lot is, why isn't all this new development paying for, it weighs heavy on people, and to me this is a significant piece in addressing that problem of development shouldering their impact, because it's not right to ask the citizens to subsidize that impact. One question I had, and I just wanted to make, to clarify it, the changes that we are asking for here is not an effort to compensate for where impact fees in the past weren't high enough, and we're trying to make up for lost ground. This is just dealing with where we are now. Am I understanding this correctly? And
That is correct. For the current eligible project list and the proportion of new growth trips, this is what we're looking at.
because I want to be fair and not impact new development and, you know, say you have to also bear the cost for previous. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Clarification as well. There are 2 projects from the 2014 project lists, Crossroads and Multiway, that have been completed but still have debt that the city is paying. And those are still transportation impact fee eligible, so the city is allowed to continue to collect to pay for that, and that will continue.
Okay, so that's what I was understanding as you were talking, is that because it meets certain conditions, we can go back and apply. Is that correct? Okay.
Not even go back, but to continue.
Yes, good. Worded better than my choice of words. So, and then because there has been, with all this added traffic, the streets of Bothell have had a lot of wear and tear, and we took safe streets and sidewalks to the people, and our citizens willingly took on that burden of that other piece of trying to make our roads better, more, give them longer life. Raising this impact fee, will that free up our dollars to spend our other dollars towards other road problems? I'm not talking about using the transportation impact funds, but will that allow us a little more financial room to take dollars that we would have to accommodate, where we've in the past had to accommodate new development? We can go now take those dollars into patch roads and fix potholes? Or is that a big leap?
So the levy money, the Safe Streets levy money, is primarily used for maintenance, as you mentioned. So like overlays and things, and sidewalks, things that traffic impact fees can't be used for. Generally, when we look at grants, for example, and I think Boyd mentioned it, one of the reasons that we have traffic impact fees, and one of the ways we use them, is as match for grant funding, so that we don't have to try to cobble together real estate excise tax fees, for example, to act as our match for the grant projects that we do. So they're typically the bigger projects. So there isn't really a whole lot of other funding that gets freed up by the transportation impact.
But having those, you're saying that it also makes us eligible for grants?
Correct.
Okay, that is good to know.
Yeah, and just to add to Director Lenhart's, it's 31% developer share. The rest is city and grant share.
Okay.
So the potential exists if you under collect that 31%, you'd be looking at other revenue sources, which could impact.
Correct. Then we're back to the citizens subsidizing it. Am I understanding? If we under collect?
Yeah, then development wouldn't be paying what we believe is the fair share.
Okay, all right. And then you mentioned development buy-ins. Does this now exempt new development from like creating a new intersection, or is that, because I know.
That's a really good question. So these system improvements that are in the packet, these large projects, Bothell Way, all these other ones, they're done to address such big components like intersections and signalized work and additional lanes. It doesn't necessarily exempt a development, let's say a real high use development that it's impacting the city and the city system, but it's also making a local impact the city hasn't foreseen. It doesn't exempt them from doing those improvements, and it definitely doesn't exempt them from doing their frontage improvements or other mitigation that's required.
Okay, so with the example like that might be like the Safeway that went in, and the modifications that happened along 527, signalizing along there. Would that be one of your examples?
Safeway's before my time, but let's say,
okay.
Yeah, but let's say
I'm sorry, you're right.
A high development project, let's say Canyon Park, something in Canyon
Okay.
Let's not use that. Another project came in that's not on one of these system improvements, and it's impacting those, but it's also making a huge impact right at that location.
Like a Costco.
Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah, then they'd have to still do their work, their frontage work, and any other impact mitigation, such as a new signal.
Okay, so these fees wouldn't absolve them of that?
No,
Okay.
it's only projects are planned to address system improvements that City Council's adopted through the TIP.
Okay. Well, this makes a lot of sense to me. I do share the concerns. I love having folks come up and like Mr. Westerbeck making those comments and down the dais here about concerns for small business, because I do not want to discourage small business. They're the heartbeat of our community, and so I hope what we have set here does not discourage small businesses from moving in. But overall, I really like what you've put together here, so thank you.
Councilmember McNeil.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. There was a slide that showed Sammamish that was way up above what our proposed was. And it looks like Kenmore slightly above what our proposed would be for 2020. Is there any reason why Sammamish would be that high? Is it the type of infrastructure that they're trying to improve, or the cost of that, or what would allow them to be that high, I guess?
Mr. Samdell may be able to address that. I do know that their transportation program is huge, and the potential revenue is huge. I don't know if you.
Well, we didn't develop Sammamish's, but it is the highest that we know of in the state, and it's largely because they do have some fairly expensive transportation improvements, and pretty much all of their growth there tends to be more residential, and so the actual number of new trips being generated is somewhat lower. So if you do the math, you have some relatively high cost projects and maybe somewhat fewer trips, so the cost per trip is higher. So it's just kind of the way it works in a community like that. Whereas for some other cities, you have a more balanced, commercial and residential and so forth. And so Bothell's kind of in the middle of that compared to some other cities.
Okay, thank you. And then when we start talking about, so I'm in favor of impact fees as well. I mean, responsible impact fees, obviously. I think development needs to pay for development. I've said it many times. And we don't want to put that impact on our citizens, the community, to pay for development. I think it's unfair to do that. But when we talk about affordable housing and things like that and reducing impact fees, where are those costs going to come from? I think you said it earlier. I think you were having a conversation about that would come from potentially the community or other REIT funds or something.
So some of those questions had come down through exec to executive branch to think about prior to this, and that's why I mentioned a few times during this presentation. If we take in reduced funds based on a policy decision, it's allowed. But then the city should be prepared to find other sources of revenue to offset those. So that's one approach. So if the decision was, well, we want to reduce the funds for this fee schedule item or this one or this one or this one, there's that kind of pick and choose approach, or the math shows a rate, 10,156, but then look at the actual trip generation for these type of uses. Remember, this trip generation schedule is just a tool for developers to say, okay, I land here, I'll just use this without a traffic study. But if, as part of the affordable housing or the other ones that, let's say the affordable housing approach through community development is, we're going to try to get this density, but we're going to reduce parking because there's more transit and this and that. Well, then the transportation trips will be reduced. So it'll have a lower trip generation rate. So you'll charge the same fee, but you're charging for fewer trips. And so that's one way to address that issue. I think I went off on a segue, I'm sorry, but is that what you're asking?
Yeah, so if the trips are reduced, then obviously there's a reduction in the impact.
In the total fee, yes, impact and total fee.
Right, total fee is, I guess where I'm going is there a reduced impact? also.
Yes, that's a
Good.
very responsible way to go, because then you're not looking to offset revenue. They've demonstrated, or the city's demonstrated, that the transportation impact is less, so you collect less fee.
Right. So if we're looking at a project and we're saying this project's going to be affordable housing, I'm just using that as an example. I'm not saying it would be that, but affordable housing, and we're going to, instead of generating one trip, we're going to generate a half a trip. And when the project's completed, they're actually generating one trip. Right. So is there no less impact because we're saying there's less impact? Because to me, what you guys presented is fabulous. That is factual information. But I can get a consultant to come in here and say that I'm only going to generate a half a trip based on this information and spin it to a specific direction, but there's still going to be the underlying impact on the community. I guess I just want to make sure I understand kind of where somebody could come in here and say one thing, but it's actually the way you guys presented it to us. This is what the impact is going to be.
So that's a really good question, and the answer is we have staff, technical staff, and if we need consultants to help address that. The example I'd like to share from you is from another city, but it was for a really effective women's shelter, and vehicles weren't allowed, period. And they came in and said, how can you charge one trip per unit when vehicles aren't allowed? That was a structural imposed restriction they had. And that was documented through, and their trip generation rate went down to like 0.1. Something like that with affordable housing, when that's looked at by community development, and Mr. Cotterman may want to address that further, is if there are affordable housing options that don't generate trips because of the way they're designed, or parking restrictions, if there's that, then it's really simple to say, yeah, that's a reduced trip generation rate. But you're right, we're going to default to what the manual says and what the fee schedule says, unless there's really good justification to reduce the generation rate.
But we should feel good in the fact that there's backup, there's clarification on what's being presented. People are looking through the information to ensure that we're actually charging properly. And so that information coming back to us will show us that, like your study now is showing us, that this is what it should be, the 10-1-26 or whatever it was. We're going to get that information in the future as we go through, correct, as we're studying those projects?
Correct.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you so much.
Okay, council's had an opportunity to ask questions and comments. Is there a motion?
Fine. I recommend we adopt the proposed ordinance establishing the new transportation impact fee rate and amending Bothell Municipal Code 17.045.070 impact fee schedule.
Second.
It's moved by Deputy Mayor, second by Councilmember Zorn to adopt the proposed ordinance establishing the new transportation impact fee rate and amending Bothell Municipal Code 17.045.070 impact fee schedule. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, place your vote. It passes unanimously. We need to have a bathroom break, so we will be adjourned until 8:30. All right, City Council's back from break. We're continuing a public hearing on the school impact fees, the Northshore School District school impact fees, and we have Mr. Cameron. Is nobody from the school district here?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have Joe Paperman, who's the Chief Operating Officer for the school district, be doing the presentation this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to be here to present our request for an increase in our impact fees for the North Shore School District. Over the past several years, we've seen extremely large growth in our school district. In the past 6 years, we've had an increase of almost 2,700 students in our enrollment. And in just the past 2 years, we had almost 1,400 student increase in our enrollment. We're seeing a significant uptick in the number of students who want to move to this area just to be in the North Shore School District and have the quality of schools. We're seeing that uptick of the birth rate in King County that actually end up in North Shore starting to tick up. It used to be in the low 7s, and it's starting to get towards the high 7%. So we're seeing an uptick there. Every now and then when we have our discussions, we keep thinking at some point that's going to slow down and the development's going to stop, and we're not seeing that. We're still seeing a lot of development. We still are projecting growth over the next several years of at least 1,200 students coming into the school district over the next 6 years. Just looking at development within the North Shore School District, we just looked at the pipeline pretty recently, and there's over 1,600 single-family homes in development through the permitting process, et cetera, and almost 2,500 multi-family units in development. So we expect to see continued growth for the next several years. In order to house this increase, we've started several projects. We have a new elementary school, our elementary school number 21 out on Maltby Road, which we're looking to open in September of 2020, next school year. We've had an expansion of 30 classroom building, sort of a joint use between the Skyview Middle School and Canyon Creek Elementary. We're planning on phasing that opening. We're hoping to get some of the students that are currently on campus that's overcrowded into that building starting early next year, and then phasing in by next school year, having students from around surrounding areas come into the new classrooms that are there from other overcrowded schools. We have a new concert hall in development at Inglemore High School, which will have a concert hall and then also additional instructional space for the music programs. It'll house a little over 100 to 200 students. That one, we're just getting close to groundbreaking, and we're estimating that one hopefully will be open in September of 2021. Those three projects were all financed from our most recent bond that was approved back in 2018. We have two newer projects that weren't bond financed. We have a new high school. I would call it an elective high school. It's not going to be one with its own boundaries. This is going to be one that's going to be district-wide where students from around the district can come to it, and I'll touch on that one a little bit later. We're hoping to get that one open September 2020. We're really pushing on that one. And then we have in the planning phases a new middle school that would be on the joint campus out by the new elementary school out on Maltby Road. And that one is going to require bond funding from our 2022 bond. So subject to getting that approved, we'd plan on that probably being in the late 2023 to 2024 when we would have that one open. So looking at how we've used our impact fees, our biggest use of impact fees has been on this new high school. It's up in the Canyon Park Business Center. So we tried to be fairly innovative here. We've recognized that to house the additional students we've got coming, we need to be quicker. We need to be able to develop capacity more quickly, and we need to do it more cost effectively. So this purchase was, we purchased the old AT&T building in the Canyon Park Business Center, about 68,000 square feet of office space, and we're going to be converting it into a high school that would house about 600 students. The cost on the building was $18.5 million, and we funded that from our unreserved capital funds, which mostly come from the sale of other facilities, mostly the Anderson School in Bothell was the big source of funds for that purchase. The impact fees are going to be coming in as we recognize that, we bought an office building. When we change use from an office building to a school, there's some upgrades we've got to do. We're going to have to bring things up to seismic code for an educational facility. There's some restroom and stairway issues we've got to resolve there. I will say we had a great pre-planning meeting with staff from the city of Bothell on that project, and it was great. They were very cooperative on sort of helping focus us on what needed to be done and what we could do to try and move that project forward quickly and effectively. So we really appreciated that. We're looking at not only those improvements, but possible HVAC upgrades. We've got design permitting. In total, we're expecting those costs to run right around 7.6, and that's where we're using the bulk of our impact fees, is to sort of make that capacity expansion happen. And if you look at that total cost, we're looking at right around $26 million for a 600 student high school. If you compare that to North Creek a few years back, where we spent a little over $125 million for 1,800 students. So about 5 times the price, 3 times the students. So this is one we're looking at, trying to be more flexible, more cost effective. We also like the flexibility on this. If 10 years from now, we're trying to do a light touch. If 10 years from now, something happens and we don't need the capacity, we turn it back into an office building and we can sell it off fairly quickly. So we want to try and be flexible and wise in the use of our monies. For the impact fees, those are governed by the Growth Management Act. Impact fees apply here only to new residential development, similar to what we saw before with transportation fees. Here it has to be new residential development. The fees, similar to transportation, have to be used for new capacity projects. They have to be used within 10 years or we have to refund them to developers. So we can't use these fees to exist, for existing building remodels, system deficiencies, et cetera. It has to be for developing new capacity to house new students. In order to be eligible, we have to essentially satisfy 2 major requirements. One is in our capital facilities plan, 6-year plan that we present, we have to sort of show that we expect new enrollment from new development. So we have enrollment increases from new development within our area over the next 6 years. And that's district-wide. So when we're balancing capacity, if we have empty classrooms on the east side of the district, even though we may be overfilled in Bothell, that can sort of eliminate our eligibility at times on these fees. It has to be district-wide that we can display that we have a capacity need. So one is we have to show new growth from new development, and then the other is we have to show that at grade span we have a capacity deficiency across the district. So we have to show we've got growth and we don't have space to house them. Okay. We also have to, in our capital project plan, display that where we have that deficiency in capacity, that we have projects planned that will address the capacity, and then we can use the cost of those projects to develop the impact fees. Once we go through that process, there's an impact fee formula. We have to go through that formula calculation and show that we actually do get a positive impact fee. Looking at just sort of high level of the impact fees, the fee formula is driven by ordinance, so we don't get to decide that ourselves. By state law, we are not allowed to assess those fees ourselves. We have to rely on the local jurisdictions, the cities and the counties, to assess the fees for us, which is why we're here tonight requesting that the city of Bothell increase the fees. Currently, we have all 5 jurisdictions, the 3 cities and the 2 counties, collecting impact fees. I think the last one signed on about a year ago. Looking at the formula for calculating the impact fees, it really has sort of 2 parts. All the details, I think, are in the capital facility plans, and excerpts from that are in the documents that were on tonight's agenda. So I don't want to go into all the detailed calculations. Just sort of high level, there's 2 pieces to it. One is we calculate a student generation rate. So we have to separate single-family residents, multifamily residences, and then look at by grade level, elementary, middle school, high schools. We do separate calculations. Student generation, where we're essentially looking at, on average, how many students come from a new single-family home, how many students come from a new multifamily unit. So we're getting average student generation. We then take the costs that qualify in the capital facility plan. We can take those costs for permanent construction only, so we can't count portables or other items that we would put out to handle capacity. It has to be permanent construction. we take those costs per student and then multiply it by the student generation rate to come up with a cost per unit. So we're taking a students per unit, cost per student to come up with a cost per unit for the capacity. When we look at those costs, there are credits in there. If we get state matching funds, or we expect to get state matching funds, those would reduce the amount that we can collect on the impact fees. We also have a reduction in there for our current capital projects bond. That amount is reduced from the impact fees for those houses. So once we get a sort of net cost per unit, we cut it in half, and that's what we're allowed to actually collect as eligible fees. In our 2019 capital facilities plans, we ran through our calculations that are included. For single family dwelling units, we came up with a rate of $20,092. An increase over last year's $16,038. For multifamily units, we came up with $30,540, which is a significant increase in the multifamily. A lot of that increase in the multifamily is coming from the increased student generation rates. We've seen sort of this, in previous years, you can see in 16, 17, we actually didn't even have multifamily because we didn't see significant numbers of students coming from multifamily units. It was mostly singles and families without children moving into apartments. Now that we're seeing more townhomes and larger units coming into multifamily, we're starting to see more significant numbers coming and students coming from those multifamily developments. So for that reason, we're seeing a significant uptick in the rates on those. So with that, we'd like to request that the council approve our updated impact fee rates.
All right, thank you. Is there any questions from council? Councilmember McCullough.
Thank you. I think one of the best things I can say is that Northshore School District is such an excellent district. People are really coming to Bothell and surrounding area because you are so good. Such a high academic and educational opportunities for our kids. So please extend my appreciation to Dr. Reed and your school board for the work they've done over time. Whenever you see signs for homes for sale, you always see the sign that says, and you'll be in Northshore School District, and that's why they come. So I want to first say that. Secondly, how will these impact fees improve the use of portables in our district? Because right now, we want to reduce the portables, and how will that happen? Because will this be part of this?
So I think over time, the big reduction in the use of portables comes as we add more permanent capacity. This is a part of that. Like to say the $7.6 million isn't enough to build an entire new school.
Right.
So we're still going to have pretty high reliance on bond funding for new school, but this helps with that. So once we get that sort of permanent capacity built out, that's going to take quite a while. I think we currently have 160 portables across our district. So if you think of an average school being about, an elementary school being about 30 classrooms, that would mean we'd have to build 5 new elementaries to start bringing those down. So short run, and that would be, we'd have to add those in while also taking care of the growth.
Right.
So
right.
I think currently we're really struggling with just keeping up with the growth that we're seeing. Getting the number of portables down is something we want to do. We don't like having students in portables, but
it is what it is.
For the foreseeable future, we're probably going to be stuck with that.
Right. And then does the impact fee have some, I didn't see it here when you described what you will be doing because it's mostly capital. Does it have anything also to do with their safe streets or walking to school or?
No, not at all.
Nothing.
I mean, the only thing we can use these fees for is adding capacity to the school district. Yeah.
Right. But isn't there some fee that I can remember that housing, when they're building housing, they have to also? Is there another fee?
So when people are building housing, our team talks with the planning department about developing. So as part of that process, they come to us and ask about the safe walk to school. So they may have safe walk to schools being part of their
permitting process as they're going through that
Yeah,
with the
'cause
city.
I do remember that being part of some of that. Thank you for your presentation.
Any other questions from council? Councilmember Zornes?
Probably more comments than questions. As a substitute teacher in the Northshore School District, I have seen my share of portables. And y'all haven't lived till you've been in a portable with fourth graders who've been playing out on a rainy day recess with shoes that go squish, 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 and they all take them off. And you have a window this big. So getting these portables moved out and into a permanent structure would be so welcomed on so many levels. So my two, and the fact that putting impact fees on new construction is so sorely needed. I look at North Creek High School, which the taxpayers voted to take on that burden, and then new construction came in and just packed a whole bunch of new homes, thanks to the taxpayers of the North Shore School District. So, and they will slowly be paying their fees, but what funded that high school was the rest of us. So I appreciate getting new construction to help pay for this. I also concur with your need with multifamily, because every school that I am in, there's a lot of single parent families and, two parent families that are in apartments. And there's a lot of students that are in schools at all grade levels. So I know that there's a need from personal experience. The only question I have for you is, and I think you answered it, but I just want to confirm that, back to portables, they are not considered new construction, correct?
We can use impact fees for putting out portables. We don't like putting out portables. I hate putting out portables.
Okay.
We have never used them for portables. We want to use it for permanent construction. When we're estimating these calculations, we're not allowed to include the cost of portables in the calculation of housing new students. So if we expected to use 20 portables over the next 6 years, that would have no impact on these fees. We couldn't include that as part of the cost of new permanent capacity.
Right, that's good to know. And I'm excited to see the new high school, because I know there's a lot of great kids. So getting their new space would be a very good thing for them. So thank you.
Councilmember McNeil.
Thank you. I had a question around the new capacity. I think you said something about an arts thing up at Inglemore High School.
We're building a new concert hall at Inglemore. So there's a new concert hall at Inglemore High School, and attached to that is new capacity with the classroom. So when we do the calculations here and we take the cost of that new building, only the cost of the instructional spaces gets to count towards the cost here. The cost of the concert hall doesn't add classroom capacity, so that can't be included in these calculations.
So the instructional piece is what you're allowed to calculate in your fee?
Right.
So if you're doing any instructional stuff in a facility, then capital dollars impact fees can go towards.
Correct.
Does it matter what type of instructions it is?
Not that I'm aware of, no. As long as it's instructional facilities.
Okay, so would a pool classify as instructional?
No, because it's not adding capacity to the system. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I thought I'd ask the question. Yeah. Worth a shot. The interesting piece for multifamily versus single family and the difference between those two, I think it's great, obviously, that we're collecting for multifamily. But as we start to look at affordable housing, those tend to be the houses that families with multiple kids will move into because they're affordable. And so are you guys looking at that as far as the impact on the schools themselves?
Oh, the higher student generation rate from low income.
Yes.
So it becomes part of the average that's going in here. We aren't specifically calling it out, but it becomes part of the average. So if we're seeing more low income multifamily housing, you would see that student generation rates start to pick up on those because of the more students coming from those
Okay. And I noticed when you talked about the King County portion, are you seeing a larger King County portion of growth in King County versus Snohomish County? Because I think the capital facilities are going more towards the north Snohomish County end versus the King County. I'm just wondering how that.
We're seeing it sort of throughout. I mean, it's, I think right now it's that sort of, within the urban growth boundary area, both in King County and Snohomish County. I think Snohomish County has a little more undeveloped area that we're seeing probably a little more of the growth right now on that end. I think as we move forward, we'd probably see, if the urban growth boundary for Snohomish moves, and I know in 2021, Snohomish County is talking about that, then we'd probably see much more significant growth in Snohomish County.
Okay, and then you indicated 5 entities: King, Snohomish, I'm assuming Woodinville, Bothell, and Kenmore.
Right.
And are all of our impact fees the same?
They're not all the same. I think all the entities, because they have different time frames, some of them are only adopting on a 2-year cycle, some are a year behind. So I think everybody's adopting as they come on, but some of them are still on the 2017 and they'll be adopting 2019 next year. Some are. So currently they're a bit off, but mostly because it's just the cycle of when they adopt versus when our capital facility plan comes out doesn't always match up in every jurisdiction.
Okay, so just for clarification, so when next, let's say, has Woodinville adopted yet?
Yes, I think they were our most recent adopter. Yeah.
Okay, and are they at 20,000, 092, and 3540?
No, because they adopted last year, so they're still at the 16. They're at the lower rate because they adopted before our 2019 capital facility plan came out.
Okay, and then so all of us will be at the same rate, including King County and Snohomish County.
There tends to be a little bit of leapfrogging. If one of the jurisdictions adopts every year, then they would move up. Some of the jurisdictions only do their capital facility plans every 2 years. So they may still be the 2018 rate when another jurisdiction has moved to the 2019 rate, and then 2020 they would match up and then they would move out. So it doesn't.
So if I want to save $4,000, I go build in Woodinville?
Yeah.
So what you're saying? Okay, I got it.
If you wanted to. Yeah.
Okay. And then the last question I had for you is when it comes to spreading capital projects around in building high schools and stuff like that, are you guys looking at trends for like older neighborhoods as well? Because when you have, I notice like, I live south of the river. I live in Bothell and my kids go to school at Inglemore High School. And I notice there's a trend of when you got the young kids, new families move in, the elementary schools are overcrowded. Then all of a sudden, new development that's got 100 homes in is built. There's even more crowding in that elementary school, but as they move through, now they go into the middle school, into the high school. So then, 8 to 10 years later, the elementary schools have, a lower, amount of students in the schools. But the high schools are overcrowded. So are you guys looking at the capital on how that the new developments don't impact you today for elementary per se, but they're going to impact you down the road for middle and high school?
And that's, when we've looked at our projections, we've had this huge surge at the elementary, and now we're starting to see that is sort of topping off a little bit. 6 years later, then we start to see the surge at the middle school, and then 3 years after that, we start to see the surge at the high schools. And that's one of the reasons why our most recent projects, we're looking at the middle school out at Maltby, because we're expecting to see the surge in middle schools. And that's one of the reasons for our CP4 new high school project was we're starting to expect to see a surge in high schools over the next 4 to 5 years. So we wanted to start building out capacity to handle that increase.
Okay. And selfishly, I'm going to ask the question. You guys, are you going to rebound district boundary again?
I hate doing it, but at some point we have to. When we develop a new middle school, we have the boundary change coming up next September. Just because we're going to add in a new elementary, and we have to reboundary so that new elementary is accounted for. When the new middle school comes in, we'll obviously have to reboundary for the new middle school.
Okay.
So as long as we have, I mean, it'd be great if everybody decided to build their houses and move where we had capacity in schools, but they don't tend to do that. So,
No, I asked the question selfishly because I think, for me, I live in one community neighborhood and I have friends that live in, my kids have friends that live in another. And one of the things that I see with friendships is when you read boundary or redistrict or whatever, however you shake that out, you could have kids that have been friends and going to school together for a while. And then when you redistrict them, then they're in different schools. And it makes it difficult on kids. That was just a personal point.
yeah, and I think, and our goal is when we're doing these boundaries is to try and look ahead as to, do we have at least a 5 or 6 year window where we think we've got enough capacity that sometimes we get surprises, but we try and look ahead. And we also try and look ahead to like the current boundaries for Kokanee and Fernwood made them very sort of overcrowded, and the goal was when the new school came on, we would just have to change boundaries of those schools. We wouldn't have sort of a ripple effect throughout the entire district. So we were pretty conscious about trying to focus. We'll overcrowd the 2 schools or the 3 schools that surround where the new school is going to be. Then we just have to reboundary those 3 schools and not, shift everybody balanced. And then when we put in the new school, we move some in, and then we have to move some up, and then so trying to minimize the number of schools we're impacting when we do the boundaries.
Can I have a motion to extend the meeting? I think we need it at least till 11 p.m. I'll second it. So it's moved by Councilmember McNeil, seconded by the mayor to extend the meeting till 11 p.m. Any discussion on the motion? See none, please your vote. It's blinking. Just clerk. Passes unanimously. All right, back to the school impact fees. Is there a motion on the school impact? Does anybody else have any questions for the school district? School district impact fee. Just want to make sure that's clear. Is there a motion?
I move the recommended action.
It's moved by the deputy mayor, seconded by Councilmember McAuliffe to adopt the proposed ordinance.
Mayor, sorry to interrupt. The recommended action, there are alternatives for the council. So I would ask for clearer direction on which option you're asking.
It says we got adopt the proposed ordinance with fees at the level requested by Northshore School District or. So we have those 2 to choose from. Oh, you know what, real quick? Mr. Loesch, do you have a public comment? Because I haven't asked for anybody if they had public comment. Karen, you okay? All right.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't ask that earlier.
Redo my motion.
Sure.
I move we adopt the proposed ordinance, attachment 2, with fees at the level requested by North Shore School District.
Thank you.
That's what you needed. All right. So it's been moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councilmember McAuliffe to adopt the proposed ordinance attachment 2 with fees at the level requested by North Shore School District. Is there any more discussion on the motion? See none, please your vote. That passes unanimously. Next is council conversations. If you want us to rip your heads off, go ahead and take as much time talking about council conversations. Any council conversations for tonight? Awesome, good. All right, so we're gonna go. Oh no, no. Councilmember McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I have a request, and so I want all of us to consider this. The tree lighting and bringing Santa to town on the fire engines, which we greatly appreciated, Santa and Mrs. Santa, brought in about 4,000 people. For any of you that attended, the main street was full, and this is their 5th year to do that. But I am aware, because I was in the information booth from like 1 to about 9 at night, and so I'm aware that there were some issues that we could resolve by having a debriefing with the city, because there are things that happened that the city could feel, you know, kind of like we didn't do our job, or that my members feel that the city didn't do their job. So if we could debrief, I think it would make a big difference for the future. The tree lighting has happened for 5 years with 2 community members doing it. 2. I mean, it's an amazing job. The market came in, our Friday market came in this year, and we have only 5 volunteers. So I think just having the city kind of partner a bit so we can talk about what happened that was right and what could we do next year to make it a little smoother would be very important. So that's the request I'm making tonight.
On that note, so I had a lot of concerns about the parking signage as well as the safety aspects, because a lot of people, unfortunately nowadays, actually careen through crowds in roads. And so I'm just looking at it, I did not bring my family down there for those reasons. But yeah, I don't think it would hurt. I know we have a permitting process, that there was a permit issued, and how serious the group takes the requirements of the permit is, I think it'd be a great thing to debrief about. I don't know if it's necessarily a council-matic level thing. I think it'd probably be more with staff. Yeah, okay. I agree with that, because
I think it would make a huge difference for making sure that our committees do what they need to do, and the city also stands up for what they need to do as well. Because we pay for, all of the fire permits and all the other permitting, and there's expectations on both sides. And I would just like the city to sit down and have this conversation. So next year, when we do it again, and we bring in a carousel,
oh, Lord.
we'll have less problems. No, but well, we're working on it.
Yeah, I'm sure anybody that does a event permit, they're probably more than welcome to debrief with the city on how it went, because I know some city staff were there to staff the event, and they probably can give you some feedback. And
yep, that'd be good.
All right, anybody else want to do a council conversation? Awesome. Okay, so all right, so we're going to go into executive session until 11 p.m. Performance of a public employee pursuant to RCW 4230-110-1G, and we will not be making any decisions after that, and we'll be adjourned.